Okay, so this is the first audio Ask Me Anything that I've done, and we're going to see how it goes. It's probably going to be a little bit hit and miss because I haven't tried this before, but I think it's worth the attempt. I'm having a lot of flashback right now, honestly, to when I was in college. I did a lot of radio while I was an undergraduate between 94 and 98, and this feels a little bit like being on radio again. So hopefully I'll pick it back up like riding a bicycle. So I'm going to go through the questions that you've asked me. They're all supposed to be not on politics, so I'm going to skip the ones that are about politics. I think that would really bore people anyway, and really get to the important stuff. Like Ali asks, if you could have one superpower, what would it be and why? And I get asked this every time I do an Ask Me Anything. I always get this question, and I think that I've come to a decision, and that is I'd like just the ability to fly. I've always wanted to travel much more than I have. I've traveled a bit, but not nearly as much as my heart would like me to. And of course, now really no one can travel. And so the ability to fly and to actually not feel cooped up in the house and see places I've always wanted to see, yeah, that's the one I'd go for. That's the superpower I want. And I'm sure there's something you can look up now that will tell you about someone's personality if they say they want this superpower or that superpower. I think I know what they say about people who want to be invisible. So that's not me. I want to fly. How do you make a tuna fish sandwich? I don't. I hate tuna fish. I hate it. So I would never do that. I wouldn't let someone do that to me. I do like tuna in sushi. I'm a big sushi fan. Tuna, salmon, yellowtail, eel, doesn't matter. I like all of it. So tuna and sushi, not in a sandwich. Do you think baseball should continue? Harry asks. Should the NFL? Someone asked me in a prior AMA whether I thought that there would be a champion crowned in MLB, the NBA, or the NFL this year, and I think my answer, if I remember correctly, was I doubt it. We've already seen what just happened with the Miami Marlins. 14 players, staff, and coaches developed the coronavirus, and so they had to cancel their season opener. You know, we're just like 48, 72 hours into the baseball season, and you already have one team that apparently can't play. You may all know that I'm actually an avid sports fan. I've been a sports journalist at a number of media outlets, and so it's not something I talk about on the feed very much, but actually I got my start in journalism as a sports reporter. So I do follow this stuff closely. I think the NBA is doing the best it can with the bubble/campus idea in Orlando, but the reality is there are just too many moving pieces. The moment someone gets sick, the length of quarantines that are required, I think the logistics could be prohibitive. I'm not sure whether we will see a full Major League Baseball season or whether it will get to the playoffs, and the same for the NBA and the NFL. I think the NBA probably has the best shot because it's created this bubble system and very few journalists coming in. The campus is technically not closed in Orlando, so people could wander in and contaminate the area, but I'm sure they're using security to be careful about that. So no, probably baseball, the NFL, and the NBA can't safely continue. They probably shouldn't be giving people the impression that we can safely have sports right now, or even that we deserve sports right now, until we do universal contact tracing, until we do universal testing, until everyone's wearing a mask, until we're all socially distancing, until we all have the facts about COVID-19 and these stupid conspiracy theories, lying about where it came from or how serious it is. Until those fade away, I'm not sure we deserve to pretend that things are normal and that we should still have sports. Nick asks, have you listened to the band Tool? Weirdly, I got asked this in the last AMA also, and I think what I said at the time was, is Tool the band that has a hidden track about, quote-unquote, the Holocaust of the Carrots? And I think someone told me that that was Tool, because I wasn't sure if it was Tool or Helmet. And someone, I think, told me it was Tool. So if that's the case, then yes, I've listened to Tool, though the only track I can remember is a hidden track where a fake preacher is talking about a carrot farmer as being someone who is enacting a Holocaust on the carrots. So I don't really listen to a lot of industrial music, and there you go. That's my Tool knowledge. So I'm scrolling through what people have asked here. Let's see. Ryan asks, seeing as as how you love psychedelic rock. Have you ever taken psychedelic drugs? Would you if their legal status was different? So I have both smoked and vaped marijuana. I did go to art school. A lot of people don't necessarily remember that because it was in the late aughts, but it's up there in my bio, and you can sort of assume what you will from that. But I have a terminal degree in the fine arts, and I've spent years in the artist community, and I think we all sort of understand that there's you might say, an ethos of experimentation there. But having said that, I haven't really done much. I haven't done mushrooms or I haven't tripped at all. And really, I think LSD and mushrooms are the things you'd think of when you think of someone who used to be a radio DJ focusing exclusively on psychedelic rock from the US and the UK between 1967 and 1972, which is what I did in the 90s when I was an undergrad and had a show that focused on that music. Frankly, at that point in time, I had not done any drugs at all. I was a big believer, maybe because I had to be, because I was a little bit scared about drugs, in Donovan's theory, the singer Donovan from the 60s, that you could sort of achieve a natural high if you listened to the right type of music. So it was a very self-aggrandizing theory that I had at the time. I certainly learned when I was in art school that no, that's not true. You can definitely get actually high with marijuana, other drugs. But that was a long time ago. I haven't done any of that in a long time. There are times when I think I'd be more relaxed if I did. Does the legal status affect it? Yes and no. I certainly always favored the legalization of marijuana. As I know from being a public defender, marijuana is significantly less dangerous than alcohol. As a public defender, you could have, and I did have, hundreds of cases that involved alcohol, particularly domestic violence cases, obviously DWIs and so on and so forth. And you almost never came across a case that involved marijuana in any substantial way, in any influential way. For every 100 cases you had that in some way involved alcohol, you might have 1 or 0 that consequentially involved marijuana. And so I've always believed it should be legalized, and honestly have never had much regard for those who think otherwise, who think that alcohol should be legal and not marijuana. So that's a long answer to that one. Josie asks, what is your writing process, and how do you manage to keep all the details straight? I keep everything in my head. I do not have a map on my wall. I do not keep copious notes. I simply live, breathe, and sleep, and think, and process this material, the research that I've done for my books, all the time. A good part of every day, to the point where you know it as you might know any subject that you've studied for years. In terms of keeping the details straight, I think I've said in other AMAs that when there are a lot of things that you're not good at, and that's definitely the case for me, the small number of things that you are good at, you can be very good at, because you're really not even trying to be good at many other things. And so I tend to be pretty good at keeping the details straight, though, as we saw with the audio I just posted, I certainly from time to time can find myself missing a detail, or possibly misstating, as I did in my audio about an hour ago. I misstated CrowdStrike as CloudStrike. I misstated Alexandra Chalupa as Andrea Chalupa. So, those things happen. But generally speaking, this is something I have down pretty well. But again, I underscore that there's so many other things that I don't. So I just spend a lot of time on this. Let's see, other questions. I probably shouldn't even have answered that one, by the way, because that was about politics. But Barbara asks, is the vegetable patch still at the White House? Barbara, I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not sure what we have invested in it. Are we talking about Michelle Obama's vegetable patch, maybe? that she did as part of her initiative as First Lady to get kids interested in exercising and eating well. I suppose maybe that's what we're talking about. So maybe this is a backdoor way of saying that Melania Trump has no real agenda as a First Lady except Be Best, which is an anti-bullying campaign when her husband is the biggest bully ever to participate in American politics. Coffee or tea, someone asks me. Black or with perk, drip or press, hot or iced. I do not drink tea, though sometimes I guess, drink cold peach iced tea, but that's very rare. I try not to drink too much coffee. When I drink it, it has to have a lot of the nice stuff in it. Creamer and sugar, because I really actually don't like coffee very much. I just drink it because it makes my bowels movement. That's the honest answer. It just moves things, and that's why I appreciate coffee. But generally, caffeine does not agree with me. Which would you rather fight, a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? Yeah, I feel like I've seen variations of this question before. I don't know. I think I'm gonna say a horse-sized duck. Yeah, I'm gonna say a horse-sized duck. I feel like you can be easily surrounded by 100 of anything, and they're less predictable because they all have their own strategies. Another question about the superpower. Let's see. Do you have a pet? Yeah. My wife and I have 2 3-year-old rescue hounds. Quinn, we now think, is a Great Pyrenees mix with a lot of treeing walker coonhound. She comes from Arkansas. She was found by a mailman along with a few of her sisters in an abandoned lot in Arkansas. And then we have Scout, who is a 3-year-old, we believe, Whippet Terrier mix. So this is why we think of them both as hounds. Scout definitely is the more traumatized of the two. She was found by herself wandering around in Alabama without any family or anyone. So she's the one who struggles the most with fireworks, loud noises. She's just very easily scared. She's incredibly sweet. She's the younger of the two, so she's definitely the beta as between her and her sister. And we just actually got her a little plastic pool that she can splash around in outside, and we discovered that that is her favorite thing in the world. So Scout's a lot happier right now after a few really bad weeks with the fireworks. What is your earliest memory of learning? My memories start really late. I know some people will say, oh, I remember being 2 years old or 3 years old. I'm not sure I remember anything besides just the vaguest couple of images until I was like 5 or 6 years old. So, yeah, my life starts really late. Tito says, what is the meaning of life? It's hard to do that question free form, just to riff. I have no idea, obviously, but I did put up in the last AMA some of the things that I believe in most strongly as basic precepts that sort of govern how I live. That doesn't mean that it works for everybody, but just some things to keep in mind, like always being willing to be a beginner, always being willing to explore, being willing to let yourself grieve, willing to let yourself make mistakes, trying as best you can not to make mistakes of the heart as compared to all the other types of mistakes that we make. I think the worst type of mistake is a betrayal of your own heart and a betrayal of your own what I call poetics, which is the idiosyncratic relationship that I think we all develop between ourselves and the culture that we live in, the language that we use to communicate, our sense of self-identity, and the various communicative forms that we use, the various genres of communication that we use. I think we all have our own relationship with those 4 things. And for me, a big part of the meaning of my life is trying to understand what my poetics is, where it came from, and how to pursue it in everything I do. Everything I do online, everything I do in my books. Because if you have a sense of your poetics, if you have a sense of the relationship that you, because of your personality, your traumas, your experiences, your skill sets, your knowledge bases, um, everything about you, if you understand the relationship that that's created between you and culture, language, self-identity, and the genres of communication that you work in, it makes it much harder to betray your own heart and to betray your own worldview and your own ethos. And so that's kind of been my life pursuit, and that's where my books come from. That's where my Twitter feed comes from. All of it comes inductively and organically from me trying to follow the trajectory of how I interact with my environment and to understand why I interact with it in the way that I do. And then obviously, be generous, be good to people, be kind, celebrate goodness wherever you find it, and battle with its opposite wherever you encounter it. Seth, would you ever consider reading some of your own poetry, some dearest to you? Yeah, I mean, of course, I've given a lot of poetry readings. I performed my poetry in a lot of different places, and maybe someday I actually will grab one of my poetry books. I'll do an audio AMA and I'll read one of my poems. I'm certainly not averse to that. I have a face for radio, but hopefully also a voice for radio. And so, yeah, I mean, I'll read some of my poetry if people want me to at some point. Have you lost any friends or family members to COVID-19? I certainly have people I know who have it now, people who previously had it. And as some of you know from my Twitter feed, my father passed away back in April, late April. It was not of COVID-19. I want to underscore that. But what people are learning who lose loved ones during the pandemic is that everything about the grieving process, everything about losing someone you care about is impacted by the pandemic. Whether you can be with them when they pass, just everything about it. I've been to a socially distanced funeral for my own father. And that's not how you want that experience to be. That's not how you want to honor someone that you love. So, I certainly feel a very personal connection with what's happening right now. Have you been to Burning Man? I'm asked. No, I've not been to Burning Man. I'm not sure how well I would handle Burning Man. Number one, because I don't like really hot weather. And number two, because I'm way too much of a square in actual life. Is there a Bible story or saying that touches you? If yes, what is it and why does it stick with you? So I actually got the Jewish version of confirmed, meaning that I studied at Hebrew school once a week alongside going to public school until I was 16 years old. So actually I did a lot of studying of the Bible when I was younger. I am not religious now. I'm not practicing at all. But in my younger years, I certainly had a significant religious education alongside my secular education. I think the stories that always resonated most with me from the Bible were about the Judges, that particular book and those particular, depending upon how you want to see it, historical or mythical figures. And so I think the story of Samson and Delilah, and the story of Gideon and how Gideon selected his army to combat a much larger force, and how he was instructed, according to the Bible, by God in determining which men to bring with him in this undermatched army he was going to, or overmatched army he was going to be the general of. I think I wrote a lot of poetry, actually, about Samson and about Gideon, and then also, for some reason, Jonah and the whale always stuck with me a lot. So why do they stick with you? The tragedy of Samson's story, certainly, the loneliness of Jonah's story, the sense of isolation, of feeling like you have a task ahead of you that you're not necessarily up for and that you don't want to take on, which is certainly the case with Jonah. And then with Gideon, I like the idea that he was leading a group of underdogs, and that there was a sort of mystical aspect to how Gideon was going to determine how best to be an underdog and how best to be a leader of underdogs, and I always found that an interesting story. Let's see. If you could choose what kind of boss to have, which one would you pick? A competent jerk or a nice idiot? So that's not really something I have given much thought about. I actually haven't had that many bosses of the conventional sense in my life. I work in academia now, and so you don't have a boss in the sort of conventional way. You might be able to hear my dogs barking right now. All right, so we're continuing. I think the dogs are done for now. Um, Someone asks, do you think there's anything in the world that everyone could or would agree on? I suspect that most people want to know the meaning of life. However they construe that question, whether it relates to the existence of a deity, or how human existence, or not how, but why human existence began in the first place, why the universe began. I bet most people have at least a passing interest in that question. I don't think that you can ensure that everyone in the world would agree on anything, but I think you probably got the best bet with that. Favorite Beatle or Beatles song? Well, no one ever says Ringo, and I'm not going to be the first person to say that. George Harrison was incredibly talented, but at least while he was with the Beatles, he had a number of good songs and very competent musician. But I'm not sure he produced enough before he went solo for anyone to say that he's really clearly their favorite Beatle in a way that I can at least understand. So it does come down to the old debate between John and Paul. Essentially, do you like the experimental instinct, or do you like the pop instinct? Do you like something that's accessible, or do you like something that's innovative? And honestly, I kind of refuse to choose between the two. I have so many Beatles songs that I love. I mean, like everyone, I can listen to Hey Jude, Something, Strawberry Fields, just sort of, endless numbers of times. I really like We Can Work It Out. I often will mention that song among their earlier work. I'm not sure why I like it so much, but I do. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to have a favorite Beatles song because they're all so exemplary. Um, Favorite Southern New Hampshire restaurant before and after COVID? I mean, for breakfast, I really do like the Red Arrow Diner a lot. Um, I mean, that's a really easy answer. That's not like a special answer. But there is, sort of in downtown Manchester, there's a restaurant called the Foundry, which was founded and is owned by the guy who invented the Segway, Dean Kamen, and I think that's a very good restaurant. But I'm not really good at thinking about these things, off the cuff. Um, I probably have a favorite restaurant for like every different type of food. And so I would never really pick one restaurant because it depends on, what I'm in the mood for. Let's see. If you could relive one moment of your life, what would it be? I think by definition, if there's a moment that is that personal to you and that spectacular, you're inclined not to want to share it and just, hold it to yourself. But in my case, I did see the Northern Lights in the middle of Swedish farmland. I think it was maybe in 2012, so maybe 8 years ago. A friend and I had been driving all over Norway, Sweden, and Finland on a trip where we also went to the Netherlands and Denmark, but we went, all over northern Scandinavia, sort of chasing the Northern Lights because neither of us had seen them. And just by a quirk of fate, after we were just about to give up, they appeared as we were just in the middle of a field in rural country in extreme northern Sweden. And yeah, I would say when they appeared suddenly after all that effort, and just given the majesty of the Northern Lights, if you've never seen them before, that's one moment that I would certainly relive. But there are probably many others that just I wouldn't even talk about because they're too personal. Um, why did the Blue Jays not even consider Manchester as an option for their home field this year? I don't know. I have no idea. It's Manchester has a beautiful ballpark that is connected to a hotel, which has its own restaurant, and it's outside the downtown core. It's its own little sort of complex. It's really close to the airport. It's close to a hospital. They've renovated the stadium multiple times. It's where the Toronto Blue Jays AA team plays. The AA team, which is the New Hampshire Fisher Cats, has had a lot of success. I'm sure every minor league park has lighting issues that you'd have to address to try to bring it up to snuff. But New Hampshire is a place with very little COVID transmission at this point. And so I don't know why Manchester never even entered the conversation. I can't give you an answer. I thought it was actually very strange that it almost seemed like there was a deliberate attempt not to discuss Manchester at all. And I don't know if we'll ever get that answer. What is a day in the life of Seth like from sunup to sundown? I don't know that that's an easy one to answer, just because I'm effectively self-quarantining and trying to have very little contact with people ever since the pandemic started, actually going as far back as March. My wife and I are both basically doing that, going to a few necessary appointments, seeing family once or twice outside in a socially distanced way. But it's a weird life right now, and I certainly do spend a lot of it reading the news, when I can, reading for pleasure. I do a lot of writing on Twitter, as you know. I work on a novel. I work on my nonfiction books. And I'm an adult fan of Lego, as many of you know. And so every once in a while, just so I don't have to think about anything at all, I'll build a Lego model, usually one of these sort of specially ordered military Lego sets that you can get from this great company called Brickmania, which is located in Minneapolis and has become very, very popular among those of us who perhaps are very much pacifists when it comes to war, but are just fascinated with the engineering. Ever since we were kids, are fascinated with the engineering of military equipment, planes, tanks, and so on. And so, yeah, sometimes I'll make a sort of advanced Lego model just to not have to think about anything at all. And then I spend a lot of the day with my dogs and with my wife, and listening to music and attempting to relax, prepare for my classes in the fall. I have a full-time job. Twitter's not my full-time job. It's not the thing I am most focused on. I'm most focused on being a teacher and being an author. And so it's a stressful time, and life is weird. I think it's true for everyone. Let's see. Who are your favorite people to follow on Twitter and why? Some people ask about why I follow officially so few people. And I think people forget that you can create Twitter lists where you're following people for news purposes who you don't know personally. My Twitter follower list tends to be a small number of people who I kind of know personally, and I have that different connection with. And then I use Twitter lists to follow newsmakers, to follow news organizations. You'll notice, if you've been following my Twitter for a long time, that I largely retweet verified accounts that are run by either major media organizations or people who work for major media organizations. That's just sort of my practice on Twitter. I want to be really careful about disinformation. I want to be really careful about knowing where the information I'm putting out there is coming from. And so that just happens to be my practice. But, I really enjoy, and I will regularly retweet, people like Asharangappa or Neil Katyal. When an event happens like Portland, I'll try to find, whether verified or not, whether full-time journalists or not, the people who are really creating great video or still imagery on the ground, and retweet those people. But if you've followed my feed, you kind of can figure out who my favorite people are to follow. Just realize that many of them are being followed through lists rather than on the follower list that you might actually see. what Karen asks, what besides music do you use to unwind from the endless bad news cycle? Music is really one of the big ones, as well as reading. I just started reading David Mitchell's book, Utopia Avenue. I'm a big David Mitchell fan. If Neil Stephenson had a book out, I would certainly be reading that right now. Admittedly, it's not unwinding, but when there's a major book about the Trump administration, I like to know what's being put out there because that's the subject I write on myself. So I'll read a book by Mary Trump, obviously, or if a Woodward book comes out, or sometimes, I guess, Michael Wolff from a certain standpoint. But John Bolton, I probably spent more time with that book than I think a lot of people did. Have you read The Magic Mountain? Cynthia asks. And also, Lego, as I mentioned, which is just, it's a way, if you're going to be in the house, a lot of people are like doing puzzles now. I mean, fundamentally, that's what Lego is on a certain level. And so I find that very relaxing, just doing something with your hands that you don't have to think a lot about. Because I think too much. So Cynthia asks, have you read The Magic Mountain? I have not. I do not know what that is. Let's see. I keep sort of getting the same questions popping up. I think my feed is kind of bouncing. What classes are you teaching this semester? So all my teaching is online, but I'm teaching a digital creative writing class, which is not really about creative writing in the way that we conventionally think of it. But how we create sort of complex, high concept digital communications projects that are creative in how they are designed, in how they're framed, in how they're conceived. But it doesn't mean that they have to be poetry or fiction or nonfiction, the three major genres of creative writing. So it's really a class for creatives, people who want to be digital creatives. That could be someone who's going to work in a business, someone who is going to work in advertising or in marketing. It could be someone who is going to be an artist in the conventional sense. It could be someone who is creating a Twitter account, frankly, and trying to think about who they are as a digital communicator on Twitter. So that's one of the classes. Then I'm teaching a professional writing class. And the third class, when I get put on the spot, I suddenly, forget exactly what I am teaching. It'll come to me in just a moment. Professional writing, digital creative writing. And then, and then I am teaching a creative writing workshop, which I actually teach very, very rarely. People think I teach a lot of creative writing. I don't. I do sometimes because I have a terminal degree in the field and I've published books in poetry and nonfiction. So I am teaching a general creative writing workshop of the more conventional sort, though it's a 3-genre workshop where I'll be teaching poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. And, these days you tend to find the most people being interested in fiction and nonfiction rather than poetry. And so I imagine I'll be working with a lot of aspiring short story writers and novelists, but also people who want to write memoirs or journalistic nonfiction. Let's see. What is your favorite sandwich? I'd be lying if I said I don't like bacon cheeseburgers because, I just do. I have my whole life, but I like BLTs a lot. I think a BLT is a nice compromise when you don't want to just have a bunch of meat, cheese, and bacon, so you just have the bacon, some lettuce, and a tomato. So I guess BLT, though I would be lying if I said I didn't like steak and cheese sandwiches or cheesesteaks, because I certainly do. Let's see. Tomorrow will be another frustrating day, right? Asks the Green Arrow, and yeah, the answer is yes. New Hampshire's best brewery is, Justin asks. I don't know. I've never really liked the taste of alcohol. It's not a principled opposition to alcohol. I just don't like the taste of it. So I don't really know what the best brewery is. Let's see. If a publisher had not picked up your books, would you have considered self-publishing? Asking for a friend, asks Julie. So a lot of people don't know this, but the Proof series, those are not my first books. I think Proof of Collusion is my 14th book. Proof of Conspiracy is my 15th book. And then I published another book. So Proof of Corruption, I think, is my 17th book that I've published. So none of them were self-published. But I'll certainly say that back when I was publishing poetry books, a few of them were independent published with independent publishers and had, very modest readerships, which didn't bother me at all, because I think as an author, it's all about the book that you need to be writing in that moment. And that's the most important thing. What book do you need to write? If the book that you need to write is not one that anyone wants to publish, it doesn't mean that it's not the book you need to write. You still need to write it. I'm a big believer in that. And so I certainly don't have any opposition to self-publishing, though I think you can often find, if the book is going to have any interest to anyone but you, if it's not just private writing, but it's really going to have public interest, you can usually find some independent publisher, no matter how small, who will be interested in publishing it. In the case of the proof series, I think a lot of people are confused about, how I went about the publishing of the proof series. Self-publishing was really not an option for the proof series, and let me explain why. It was absolutely vital if I was going to write a real-time history of Trump's foreign policy scandals and have it be comprehensive, have it be fully sourced with thousands of citations to major media, have it be of use to future historians, which I very much wanted it to be, as well as of use to current American voters. It had to have credibility, in the sense that people had to feel there was an editorial oversight involved, and that there was fact-checking involved, and that there were legal reviews involved. The book had to have that sort of imprimatur of being exactly what, in fact, the proof series very much is: a fully fact-checked, using a professional team of fact-checker, epic nonfiction story that is fully sourced from major media, that has undergone not just the team of professional fact-checker review that it has undergone, but also a legal review and editorial review. It's passed muster from an aesthetic standpoint, and then also it's packaged in a way and available in a way that people sort of understand what it is and what it thinks it is in the world. I think when suddenly you drop a PDF for free on the internet and you say, this is a serious piece of research, unfortunately, we're not at a time when people see that for what it is, and people accept it as being serious, and it accept it as having the gravitas of something that's professionally published. So all these people who say, well, why didn't you just, throw the PDF online for free? I mean, putting aside the fact that even creating a professional PDF is maybe a little bit beyond some of my skills. The people who ask that are basically saying, why didn't you have no fact-checking? Because fact-checking is extremely expensive. Why didn't you have no fact-checking? Why didn't you have no editor? Why didn't you deliberately undercut the credibility of the work, despite you thinking it was absolutely essential as a matter of history and as a matter of informing American voters? And I wasn't going to do that with this content. I would have had a very different reaction if what I'd been working on was a book of poetry. I mean, I've published books of poetry that were probably read by a few thousand people, and I've written books of poetry that have probably been read by like 25 people, and that kind of doesn't matter to me because they were the poetry books I needed to write. But this was a different sort of project. So I know that was kind of a political question, but I think it's an important one, and I get asked it a lot, and so on. Can trees communicate? Someone asks. A little bit more of a lighthearted question, and depends on the meaning of the word communicate. And if you define communication as broadly as I do, as someone who teaches in a communication arts and sciences department, again, I'll note, not an English department. There is no English department where I teach. I teach in a department of communication arts and sciences. And based on how I understand communication and think about it, I would say yes, trees can and do communicate through their root systems. And through, I'm pausing now because I'm not, the scientific terms aren't all coming to me because science is not really my strong suit. But the various processes, someone will, I'm sure, comment on this and tell me what process I'm thinking of regarding chlorophyll and so on and so forth. But yes, I think trees can communicate. Let's see. Do you have a favorite Smashing Pumpkins album? No. What software are you using for these audio files? I think I'll actually skip that question. I try not to get into too much detail about sort of the digital components of my online presence just to not create unnecessary risks. Who do you predict Biden will choose as his running mate? I'm not supposed to answer political questions, but I'll just say Kamala Harris, because I think I've said that before. I think Warren would be a great choice. I was a Warren supporter, though I am going to vote for Joe Biden without question. But I think Kamala Harris is probably the best move. I won't say more about that because I don't want to get too political on this. What's your top 5 bands that call Big Star a major influence? Well, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that on the fly, except to note that so many bands and so many singer-songwriters would credit or would have credited, for those who aren't around anymore, Big Star as a major influence. I mean, I think Elliott Smith would have, as one example. He certainly covered 13, and I think Elliott Smith was great. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and see which bands I've read about that credit Big Star as an influence, but I just think it's a very large number of bands that would do so. A very particular approach to pop music and to rock as an art form that I think just became incredibly popular after Big Star's heyday in the early to mid 70s. I mean, I'm sure management would credit Big Star as an influence, but of course Big Star in its later years, there was also some really interesting experimental stuff that was, if anything, was more David Bowie-like than anything else. So, but I assume when people ask this question, they're talking about Big Star's early years. Anyway, if you haven't listened to Big Star, I definitely recommend it. Do you read all of our replies to your tweets? Are we being heard? So the answer is I read a really large number of replies to my tweets. You do have to keep in mind that, the feed gets somewhere between 75,000 and 100,000 retweets a day, depending on the day, and it gets hundreds and possibly thousands of comments a day. So I would have to quit my job and quit being a husband and quit, being a parent to 2 dogs and quit being a son and a brother and a friend and many other things besides in order to read every single reply. But yes, absolutely, people are being heard because I read a lot of the comments, and I do sometimes respond. People don't necessarily see every response because the feed moves so fast, but a lot of you who are listening to this, I know, would say that you actually have received responses from me, or you've read responses from me. Let's see. Who walks the dogs, you or Mrs. Abramson? So we share those duties, but there's no question that my wife, at this point with me working on the books, has been doing slightly more of the dog walking. I think she would say, and I would say, that it needs to be a little bit more, in fact, a lot more 50-50 than it has been, and I expect that in the near term it is going to be. Maggie asks, Seth, will you be posting to YouTube more often? I don't know. We'll see how this goes. I used to actually post a lot of readings of poetry on YouTube. I don't know if they're still out there or not. Maybe people will look for them, but I've definitely gone through periods where I was on a YouTube kick and would do a lot of readings of various things that I would upload to YouTube, and maybe I'll go on another kick and start doing that now. Let's see. I'm seeing some of the same questions again because my feed keeps kind of flipping back to things I've already seen, and so I have to scroll down again. What are the odds on Bill Barr showing up tomorrow? I'll just sort of stall while I find a new question by answering a political question. I think he'll show up. He knows that he can always lie if he has to, and he's done it before. And he can dissemble, and he's done that before. And he can refuse to answer questions, and he's done that before. So there's really no reason for him not to show up because he has no intention of honestly answering questions. Honestly and fully answering all questions asked him. Someone asked, what would you say to a 34-year-old who wants to study law because they were inspired by all this? What I always say because I'm actually the pre-law advisor where I teach, the college I teach at, and I've mentored a lot of aspiring law students and even some young lawyers back when I was practicing. And one thing I always say to people who are considering law school is, do not go to law school simply because you like to argue, or you like to write, or you like to hear yourself talk, or you're fascinated with one particular, court case that you watched on TV or that you followed from beginning to end. You really have to understand that being a lawyer is immersing yourself in a field of knowledge that is highly technical, and doing it many hours a day for many, many years, possibly the rest of your life. And so what you want to do before going to law school is, if you're going to go to law school, identify an area of the law that you are so interested in and passionate about and just mesmerized by that you'd be willing to spend all day, every day for the rest of your professional career deeply steeped in the technical aspects of that field. For me, that was criminal law. And I became interested in criminal law when I began working as a federal criminal investigator at the age of 19. Testifying in federal court, some people don't believe this, but you can read my bio. It was an extraordinary opportunity that I had to be trained as a criminal investigator in D.C. And be a federal criminal investigator for a federal public defender, testify in federal court when I was still a teenager. Made me want to be a public defender. I had no interest in doing anything else but being a public defender. It's why I went to law school. I wasn't really interested in any other area of law except maybe employment law a little bit, because it has to do with people. Though, of course, the employee side, not the employer side. And even though I was incredibly interested in criminal law, and it's all I was focused on for years, I still found that after a total of, I think it was around 9 years of total work in the criminal justice system, I had to switch and do something else because I had other passions, and I just couldn't be steeped in that really kind of depressing and heart-wrenching milieu for any longer. And that's something I loved. So the law has a very high attrition rate of people who quit the law within the first 5 years of graduating from law school because they just didn't think through what it meant to be a lawyer. So if you love tax law and you love numbers and you love looking through tax returns and you're genuinely fascinated by it, great. Maybe you can be a tax attorney for 30 or 40 years. If you find criminal law fascinating, not the TV version, but the real version, as I did, maybe you'll make it 40 years, maybe you'll make it, close to 10, like I did. But the law is really tough stuff emotionally. It can be very dry. It can be very technical. It's very forms-based. And so I don't know whether just being fascinated by the Trump-Russia case or the Trump-Ukraine case or any of these other scandals is really enough. You really would want to pick out a subgenre like international law or antitrust law or criminal law and say, look, this is something I can do for basically the rest of my life. Looking for other questions here. Who's the best film director working in the world today? I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer that question. I know what movies I like. I'm not sure whether I'm the sort of moviegoer who would like everything by one director. I don't tend to operate that way. I have more of a horizontally oriented Catholic small c type of taste in which I like all sorts of different things, and I don't necessarily obsess over one actor or one director. It's very consistent with curatorial journalism, where you have to be horizontally interested in a news story rather than simply vertically interested and say, I want to read everything the New York Times has written or everything this one journalist has written. You have to want to read and curate news sources from around the world, going back decades from hundreds of different media sources. And I think I sort of consume art in the same way. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I think that's been about an hour, and hopefully this works and I can post it. I really appreciate everyone's questions, and if this goes well and if people like it, we'll do it again soon. All right, take care, everyone.